Welcome to Ultralight Startups and welcome to Future Energy. My name is Graham Lawler and I will be one of your hosts tonight along with my partner Chris DeLuca. I run the Ultralight Startups chapter in New York City. Chris is based in Boston and he runs all of our events and our activities out there. So welcome to Future Energy. This is what you'll see today. We're going to do some introductions. You'll see startups pitching. These are all energy and clean tech startups in a variety of disciplines that we'll talk about momentarily. After all of the 9 pitches, you all are going to be voting on your favorite startups and also on your favorite panelists, and we will announce the winners of that voting contest at the end of the agenda today, and we'll be awarding some prizes. And then we have drinks and networking. So this space is open until 10 p.m. And soda and non-alcoholic beverages are free, but you're welcome to use the bar for anything else. I encourage you to do that. So I'll tell you a little bit about the companies and how they were selected. We had applications from 87 startups to present at this event. There are 9 finalists, so filtered that down almost 10 to 1. They're all early stage companies. So any company that applied that has already raised a significant amount of venture capital, or really any venture capital, was eliminated from the selection. We also took the early stage companies and we invited them onto a crowd voting site. And the 2 with the most votes got automatic spots. And then we had the rest picked by our selection committee. And we wanted a cross-section of technologies, so a little something from wind and solar and biofuels, and you'll see all of those. Also, all of the 9 finalists received coaching from our pitch coach, Mac Lipscomb, and that prepared them for the presentation today. So, Chris, do you want to introduce our panel?
Sure. Thank you, Graham. So I'm just going to introduce the panel here. We're going to ask the panel to just kind of talk a little bit about their firm and actually mention one of their most recent investments and why they're excited about it. So I'll start down the end with Willem Rensink of Shell Game Changer program. So tell us about Shell Game Changer and maybe one of your recent investments.
So my name is Willem Rensink. I'm with Shell Game Changer based out of Houston, Texas. And we are the front-end innovation funnel for Shell. So we really incubate in a collaborative research model. We work with early-stage companies to bring technologies to a proof of concept that's relevant to the industry space that Shell is active in. And we are building an active portfolio in clean tech options for us as well. And so one of the things we recently got involved with, again, is as natural gas becomes more abundant, and of course Shell has a big stake there, so it's a novel technology to be able to convert natural gas into liquids in a novel, scalable way.
Thank you, Willem. Fantastic. Next on the list, we're going to go down with Debjit Mukherjee here from Siemens. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm with a group called Siemens Technology to Business. We have a pretty innovative engagement model. We do venture partnering, so we look for early stage startups in energy, in industrial automation, drive technologies, mobility, areas like that for Siemens. And we fund projects that are of mutual interest to both Siemens and the startup. So it's kind of a quick way to see if there's a good strategic fit before we commit additional resources. So some of the stuff that we've done recently has focused around smart grid and wind. About a year and a half ago or so, we did an investment, funding investment in a company called Cubotics, which was very active in, it's really a solar robotics company, and very neat stuff. It's for both concentrated solar as well as regular solar, and really changes the game in terms of overall cost. Unfortunately, Siemens exited the solar business, so it's not so much strategic for us anymore. But it's one of those investments that we were really proud of.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Debjit. Next person we're going to introduce is Ron Hoffman of Claremont Creek Ventures. So Ron, tell us about Claremont Creek and maybe a recent investment.
I'm actually pinch hitting for Nat Goldhaber, who I'm sure you would have enjoyed having here today. I'm a venture advisor for Claremont Creek. I'm primarily a serial entrepreneur and an angel investor, but I'm very active in the clean tech space, and that's what one of my associations is, why I have an association with Claremont Creek. Claremont Creek is a venture capital company that in the clean tech area is focused primarily on software. And a recent investment of theirs has been at the seed level with a company called Building Robotics out of the University of California. I believe they have a website. You can learn about them on that website. But it's strategic in the sense that if a company like Building Robotics gets any traction, there's a lot of other opportunities that they enable. My interest in being here today is basically because I am a serial entrepreneur, and I've been in your shoes many times before, and hope to be able to add some wisdom to what you're seeking.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ron. Fantastic. And last but not least, we have Shaheen Farshi here from Lux Capital. Tell us about Lux and maybe a recent investment.
Sure. So Lux has been around for the past 13 years. Traditionally, we invest in companies that are leveraging a core scientific breakthrough relating to energy, healthcare, or information technology broadly. We help start companies from scratch. We invest in kind of companies in their revenue stage. We typically cut checks from a couple $100,000 in the very early stages up to, say, $10 million in a later round. The expectation is to put $10 to $15 million to work per company towards maintaining a double-digit percentage ownership of $1 billion outcome. We're investing from a $250 million fund, so if you do the math, we're looking to return something on the order of our fund in every investment that we make. We like backing great teams with big ideas that could change the world, with some kind of an unfair advantage that's typically enabled by technology. And I'm an engineer by training. I love anything that involves electrons, holes, or photons. I looked at electronics, energy, materials, robotics, automation, and we can talk after the panel about other areas that I look at as well. Recent investment that we've done, a company called Gridco. A few former Juniper Networks and Sycamore Networks guys came together and wanted to do the same thing to the grid that they did to basically communications. And they're making voltage regulating transformers for distribution. So basically making the grid smarter, enabling kind of distributed generation as well. So that's one of the recent investments.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shaheen. So let's tell you a little bit about the pitch format tonight. So you're going to hear from 9 startup pitches tonight. Each will have 3 minutes as part of their pitch. They're going to 3 minutes straight. We'll cut them off right at that final moment. And then moving right into question and answer. So this is an opportunity for the panel to ask questions, and it's going to be an interactive session where the panelists will ask the question and the presenter will be able to respond to those questions, concluding the session with 3 minutes of advice and feedback from the panel. And this is an opportunity for we're asking the panel to actually put themselves in the shoes of the entrepreneur and give them takeaway advice as if what would they do the following morning, and how would they change that company to grow it and take it to the next level. And there's no opportunity for the presenter to actually respond to that. So it's just takeaway advice and move on. And obviously pay attention. Hopefully you grabbed a program and you can take notes along throughout the night, because you'll be participating in voting for your favorite company. So there's actually a competition which they're competing for prizes up here. So these are the different prizes that they are competing for, the presenters. CleanTech Open application, it's a complimentary application to CleanTech Open. Surge Accelerator, you can win a interview for mentoring, as well as Agrion, a roundtable presentation, and a quarterly pass to Action Incubator Network. And then really the true prize is the other competition going on up here, and that's really the panelists award. So that's you're going to be voting for not only your favorite companies, but also your favorite panelists. And so they'll be really competing for your eternal gratitude.
And do we get a prize?
That's it. That is your prize. So you get bragging rights, and we get to invest in it. That's right. And if you want to just say thanks.
Sure. And before we get on with the first pitch, I'd like to thank a few people. So firstly, Willem Rensink and Shell's Game Changer Group for sponsoring us here. Also, Ryan Howder of Hobson Town, who I think is here as well. You'll hear from at the break. And a number of communities that helped to bring you all here and to bring the 87 companies that applied for this event. So just running down the list of contributing communities, BERC, the Berkeley Energy and Resource Collaborative, Caltech Office of Tech Transfer, Cornell Entrepreneur Network, First Look Out West, Stanford Graduate School of Business Entrepreneurship Club and the Stanford Energy Club, UC Berkeley B-Plan competition, Citrus, another Berkeley organization, the Cleantech Group, Cleantech Open, Founders Space, greenbiz.com, Greentown Labs, Hobson Town, again, Surge Accelerator in Houston, South by Southwest Eco, Venture Greenhouse, and Young Professionals in Energy, also known as YPE. And I would like to thank Mac Lipscomb, who all of our presenters have worked with. He is the pitch coach, and he coached all the presenters today and all the presenters at all future energy events. And I'd like to thank the presenters who have come in from some distance away to present here today. So thank you all for joining us. So, first pitch. Will be up. One's here. So, Daniel Grandi of Sunnable. You have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Thanks, Graham. So Sunnable is an online marketplace that connects homeowners to solar installers. We're making it ridiculously simple for homeowners to go solar, and we're making it 80% faster and 80% cheaper for installers to acquire these customers. Now, we're making solar simple for homeowners by giving them just one place where they can do all their research, view all their installer options, set up just one site survey, view all of their quotes on one screen, and throughout the process, they have to deal with just one person from Sunnable who will answer all their questions for free and provide unbiased advice. And as a result of this, homeowners will make decisions much faster. They currently take 9 months on average. And as a result of that, installers will be spending 80% lesser on marketing and sales to acquire these customers. We think Sunnable, people love Sunnable. We've spent zero on marketing, and we've already seen visitors and signups from 400 cities across the US. Our first customer went solar in 8 days. We have 15 other homes in the pipeline right now. We have 100 solar installers listed on our site already, including 5 of the 6 largest players in the US. So how do we make money? We charge installers $25 for every opportunity, $125 for the site survey, and $500 if they successfully close a sale. We charge nothing to homeowners. And in fact, we have 2 other revenue streams besides the direct acquisition that I just spoke about. The second one is a white label acquisition platform that we want to build out for utilities across the country to use. And our friends at Wilson Sonsini are helping us do that. And our third revenue stream is data. We've been building the nation's largest, most comprehensive data set of residential sales and installation. And this is what powers our analytics, our comparison, our pricing, everything. And we know this is valuable because we've sold $100,000 worth of data to installers across the country. And we think the data that powers Sunnable is our biggest competitive advantage. Data is a very scarce commodity in solar. And because of that, it helps people price better, people make better decisions, quicker decisions, and that data is our biggest unfair advantage. So yeah, in summary, we really think the best way to accelerate solar mass adoption is to make it ridiculously simple for homeowners and ridiculously cheaper and faster than it is right now, and that's exactly what we're doing. Thank you.
Good job. So I'm going to ask you to hold your round of applause. We're going to move right into the question and answer section. So let's start with you. Shaheen, what would you like to ask of clarification? What would you like to dig into?
So help me understand when you're selling data, which I believe is the core of your business, what are you selling and to whom and why are they paying?
So we use our data in 2 different ways. One, on Sunnable.com, when a homeowner puts in a zip code, in 5 seconds we present to them a map of all solar homes around them. That's powered by the data that we have. And that map is really powerful social proof because it's nudging homeowners to go that extra step forward. We're also using that data to sell analytics and reports to installers who want to figure out how competitors are doing, how market share is doing, what equipment's being sold, performance of systems, etc. So those are 2 ways we're using our proprietary data right now.
Question, Ron? Do you have a question you'd like to dig into?
I guess I'm a little bit confused about why installers would actually want to sign up with you, because it would seem to me that they would not like to have details of their systems in your particular area where you're comparing to be compared with the competitors in case they came out badly because you did a poor job in comparing. How do you attract these installers to want to expose themselves on your platform?
Okay, so I'll answer that question in two parts. First of all, installers, really want to be on our site because they view this as an incremental sales channel that's bringing them business that is not competing with their current sales efforts, and they would not have gotten otherwise. The information that we present to homeowners is information like how many solar homes has every installer installed in so far. So that's a proxy for popularity. Another data point we might present is historic average price. And a lot of that is in the public domain. So again, it's not comparative information. But these data points are really useful for homeowners to make a decision. So it's non-conflicting, non-comparative, and it's useful.
Debjit,
Does
question?
that answer your question?
Sort of.
Go ahead, Debjit. Question?
So a solar purchase is a pretty complicated decision. It's a long-term decision. It's a big financial investment. It requires things like tariff information from utilities, and there are many, many tariffs now that are exploding in the utility industry. It also requires a prediction of generation, likely on that roof. So I'm just wondering how you address those technical questions and billing questions, which really play directly into the overall cost of ownership.
Fantastic question. So from the time a homeowner registers with their basic information, we give them a call in 24 hours. And in those 24 hours, we do a basic design of their site. We plug into a bunch of APIs that help us. Sorry. Finish your sentence. Okay. So we pay for a bunch of APIs that help us estimate generation, the system size. There's weather data publicly available. We have real-time tariff information as well. Now we use all of that and we hand it over to the installers, and they're the experts. So when they prepare their quotes, they use all the information we've given them and everything else that they know about an address to size and quote the system. So we have some time to do that. We don't do it real time.
Go ahead, Willem. Question?
Does that answer your question?
Should we go in feedback or you want some question? So you mentioned sort of your first pitch sentence that a homeowner finds all the information to do research. So how do you keep that current, all that information that you're trying to present to a homeowner that not necessarily wants to install yet, but just want to learn about solar, because that's sort of how you present yourself and saying a one-stop shop.
Correct. So we think of homeowners in three categories. The category that we're catering to right now are the ones at the bottom of the funnel. So folks who are not entirely solar ignorant, but need just a little more information to be nudged forward. And so we're educating those customers by just simplifying concepts for them. I can give you an example. There was a homeowner in Fresno, California, who's really interested in going solar, but she has a bunch of trees in front of her house, and shading is a big problem. But there is an innovation in the industry called microinverters that makes it possible to go solar even if you have trees. There's not a single website on the internet that explains this in language the average Jane can understand. And our blog, which is sending us all our traffic today, has started to do that. As time progresses, we'll start catering to the top of the funnel as well.
Let's move right into feedback. So would you like to give some feedback, Willem?
Yeah, I would really think about how you're going to scale this, but sort of the way you answer the questions, it sounds like you're doing a lot of manual intervention and data curation, follow up with customers. And as you aggressively grow this, I think you're only as good as the data that's really on your platform. So there's curation, and I think you've got a concept that's relatively easy to copy by others, unless you're the best and have the most installers and the best data. So I think really think about the scalability and how you can sort of maintain that advantage. As you move in new areas, you're going to be data poor. And if your offering relies on a lot of data, then how can you sort of aggressively grow the entry in a new market and don't grow too fast until you figure out how to scale?
Great advice. Thanks, Willem. Debjit, feedback,
Yeah.
takeaway advice.
So this is a pretty crowded market. There are a lot of solar installers who claim to have a lot of direct interface to the consumer. So you have the Sunruns and the SolarCities and so on to work with. I think this is really a foot race, as Willem kind of alluded to. So what you're going to need to do is get critical mass of customers who are seeing the site. Once you start to generate the eyeballs, I think the other ones will come. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg too. So, but I think if you really focus on the marketing, and we didn't really talk about the branding and the marketing piece and how you're reaching out to customers, but assuming that you can generate this as a platform that you're hoping to be, like the first destination for a prospective solar customer, then I think you can scale the business pretty fast.
Feedback, Ron?
I think if I was one of the installers, I'd be very concerned that you were going to commoditize me. And in that process, I would not want to work with you, even though you might have a lot of eyeballs to your site. And even if you didn't pick me with your recommendations, I think I would try to find ways to get around your recommendations and get to those customers. The minute you talk to particular installers, they know you're going to be in a particular site. And so you're going to have to find a way to make them happy and make them want to be your customers.
Feedback, Shaheen.
So I agree with all the feedback that was given earlier. My advice would be to try to carve yourself a niche where you have people who want solar yet do not have access to the installers, or the installers don't have access to them, or they have very, very complex arrangements where it probably doesn't even make sense to use solar, and be able to provide them with the data that they would need to make a decision and give them access to the installers and vice versa, versus trying to boil the ocean with this rather difficult to scale model, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. Round of applause for Daniel.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Greg Mulholland of Citrine Informatics. Greg, you have 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
A blockbuster material is like a blockbuster drug. The screen on my iPhone is Corning's Gorilla Glass, and it's worth over $1 billion a year to Corning. But consumer electronics are not the only place that materials bring true value. Materials innovation is energy innovation. From solar panels, to battery electrodes, to magnets for wind turbines, to the drill bits that drill for oil, materials are what enable tomorrow's generation of energy. But materials are hard. It's a risky business to develop materials. It's expensive. And it takes 15 years from concept to production for a new material. I'm Greg Mulholland. I'm one of the founders of Citrine Informatics. Bryce Meredith, my co-founder, is also here. We're a master's and PhD in materials science, and we're both second years at Stanford Graduate School of Business. I spent 4 years before business school at a small semiconductor company where we were doing materials development and saw the problems that confront those who are trying to develop new materials. At Citrine Informatics, we're solving that problem. We're solving it using a cloud-based approach and a data platform to help scientists better understand their field and analyze, visualize, and mine data for new insights. We actually have a pilot going on right now at the University of California in Santa Barbara. Can I get the next slide? This pilot is in thermoelectrics, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. We've worked with a scientist there. He gave us data. We integrated it into our platform and performed some basic data mining techniques on it. We gave him materials that should be promising in his field. And what was really amazing was that they fit with his intuition. They were materials that he said he never thought of before, but that fit with his materials intuition. And the best part is, Bryce and I have never worked in thermoelectrics. It was only the power of the platform. So today we're working hard to prove out our technology with potential commercial partners, show that we can hit scale on a commercial basis, and work with scientists to get feedback to make sure we're delivering exactly what they need on a day-to-day basis. So we're really excited about what we're doing. Our partners are really excited about what we're doing. And we're excited to talk to all of you at the end of this event. So thank you, and Bryce is going to come up and join me for questions.
Okay, so let's move right into the question section. Let's start with you, Willem.
So how do you query the database? So what can I ask the database and say, I want sort of a feedback, or this is my need for a novel material, and see what's out there?
So right now we have we have a basic semantic search enabled. And so if you wanted to say, for example, a glass with a certain tensile strength. You could say, show me glasses with a tensile strength greater than some number of pascals. But that's something that we're adding aggressively now, and we're working with scientists to figure out exactly what the points are that they need.
Debjit, next question.
So what is your launch market? What is your typical customer? And what do you estimate the size of that market is?
So we're starting like Greg said with academics, not because we think that's where the scalable money is, but because that's where the early adopters are, and we're getting a lot of great feedback and kind of initial reactions there. In the long run, we're going to go for big engineering companies. About a third of the S&P 100 need materials for their products, and we think that once we get kind of a proven solution working with smaller customers, we can scale up to get the big guys.
But actually, I mean, Siemens and Shell are perfect examples of companies that we would love to work with because materials are really important to you guys, and I think that companies like Siemens and Shell are companies that we would love to start a pilot project with.
Question, Ron?
I'm, again, a little bit confused about your customers and how you're going to actually sell to them. So I suspect you're not going to sell it with a shrink wrap software package, and that your services are going to be required to work with the companies and with your customers. How can that be scalable? It sounds like you're going to become a consulting company.
That's a great question, and I think the example we would point to is Palantir, if you're familiar with them. So these are guys who do data aggregation on a large scale for the Defense Department and banks and things like that. And they have people called forward deployed engineers who will actually go to the customer site and help them integrate the platform with their data. So some of that is necessary, and I think you can do that in a scalable way, and we're seeing that companies are doing that.
Question, Shaheen.
So 2 questions. One is, A, are you entirely automated? And if not, what kind of actual manual work do you guys do? And B, what if I'm a materials scientist or I'm a chemical engineer and I'm developing a catalyst or something, what am I using today that I would be replacing with your tool?
So to answer your first question, we aren't fully automated right now. We do have, for bringing data in, we use a variety of sort of standard computational approaches, but relatively simple ones. And because we're still sort of determining exactly what our customers want, we're just doing a sort of manual first startup. But everything we're doing so far is possible to automate. We just haven't taken the time to do that. To your second question, we don't believe that computers can solve these problems. We don't suggest, as material scientists, we don't suggest that there's someone who can put something into an algorithm and say, here is one solution, here is my one metal or my one catalyst that's going to be your answer. What we do is we search a very large material space, larger than any one scientist could really think about, and we highlight a number, maybe 10 or 20 materials that we think have a high probability of success. And then it's on that scientist to use his training and his intuition to figure out what's best. And so this hybrid model where it's science, intuition, and computation is something that is really novel and something we're really excited about.
Willem, let's go right into feedback. So what takeaway advice do you have here?
Yeah, so I think the database model itself might be too limited. So I think you'll have to make clear what your algorithm sort of does and how it sorts and queries. And if it's just sort of I need sort of a certain pipe or strength, that might just be too limited, because I'd almost turn the business model around and say what I see a lot. So we get a lot of idea inflow, and if we see material science companies, the biggest challenge is always that they say, here's this great material, what can you do with that? And I never know, so because that technology is looking for a home. And so if your algorithms help you understand, here's a novel material that improves, but I know where it's currently used, I think you greatly expand the usability and your market. But then don't overestimate how much people are willing to pay for that information. Because people are expected, in the current open data world, sort of that a lot of that data might be somewhere there. So how good and comprehensive can you be in your data and the type of the services that you sell, and whether or not sort of that spills over in either a subscription service or a consultancy service. I think that's sort of the difficulty. But yeah, try to flip your algorithm and think about that, how you might implement that, because I think that's a very, very powerful value proposition.
Thank you, Willem. Debjit, takeaway advice?
Yeah, so to the extent that this is a static platform, I would try to avoid that. The more that it's a living, you talk about machine learning, to the extent that you can make it constantly, kind of self-refreshing and revealing new insights, that's going to be critical. Again, we're talking about a business, and the best way to scale this is to get into, probably a big university that's using it across various departments and can serve as the best testimonial. I have seen a few of these types of companies. It is actually quite a difficult model to scale. So getting that first launch customer is what convinces everybody else to follow.
If I were in your shoes, I would actually think very seriously about making this a consulting company. There have been some very good models of very fast-growing cash flow models. They're not venture financeable, but they've made the people involved in them extremely rich. So I would give some very serious thought to the idea that you could put together a consulting company that might go way beyond any dreams that you'd ever thought about in a venture capital model. So just think about that.
And Shaheen.
So there are companies that started off doing high throughput experimentation using tools like this. And those HTE companies evolved to becoming discovery companies, and then they evolved to becoming product companies and burning through a lot of cash in the process. So I would look back, if I were you, understand what the original attempts were, what went wrong, why things changed, and maybe it was because they took venture money. So I would think about the comments that were made earlier and also kind of looking into those stories as well, those histories as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Shaheen, and thanks, Greg. Thanks, Bryce. So next up, we have Mitra Ardron of Lumeter Networks. Mitra, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mitra Ardron from Lumeter Networks. So Lumeter sells prepaid electricity meters to renewable energy companies so they can better serve the rural poor in developing countries. There's still 1.5 billion people around the world that lack access to electricity, and there's a global push to solve that problem by 2030. But the companies we spoke to told us of a number of problems which we created Lumeter to solve. The first problem is the difficulty of collecting money from rural customers in remote areas. When you integrate our meter into a solar home system, the customer only gets electricity when they pay for it. And they can buy the tokens that enable the meters from networks of local agents that already exist to sell mobile top-ups or mobile money. This version of the meter can be integrated into mini-grids, where it also acts to measure loads, and we have technology in the lab that will detect and deter theft. Both these technologies, the OEM version of this technology is being built into solar pumping, and it's also in Kenya, and it's also being built into charge controllers in Mexico. Most importantly, it's a platform and it's adaptable. We were approached by a company in India recently that wanted to supply energy to 80 homes in a village, a fixed amount of energy, and we were by far the only product that could be adapted to meet their requirements. We use a business-to-business model, which means we can leverage the expertise of companies that already know how to serve rural poor in difficult-to-access markets. We sell them the meter. The meter costs us between $2 and $12 to make. But more lucratively, we sell them a service. We sell them the service of integrating with payment providers, such as mobile money or mobile top-up. That gives us a recurring revenue. Of course, we face competition, but our direct competitors are seriously more expensive than us. There are also competitors who build prepaid solar systems. But really, what we're doing is enabling their competitors by enabling their competitors to build in our meters. There are also generic Chinese meters, but they're either cheap or reliable, but never both. One of our key differentiators is that we don't require mobile communications at the home, which is important in rural areas. So now our pilots have been successful. We're raising $500,000 to take it to scale, to go into manufacture, and to add some more technical features. We expect to need 100,000 customers to reach break even, but that's nothing in the energy access field, and we've already received several inquiries for tens of thousands of units and one for hundreds of thousands of units. So we expect to reach profitability with about another raise of $2 million, which we'll do next year. We have a team that can do this, and we have the connections that can do this. For example, I built an NGO
10 seconds.
that's now in 40 countries and a solar company that did 20 million revenue in the first 18 months. So I hope you join us. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Shaheen, let's start with you. Questions of clarification, dig right into it.
So which, I guess, hardware company or meter company that you know of has been able to position itself to not only sell meters, but take a piece of the contracts or the revenues from the carrier or the utility as well?
Different meter companies have different models for selling, so mostly they're just selling a hardware. we found that the companies we're talking to, they'll happily pay us for the hardware, but it's better in many cases for them to pay us a percentage because there's less money up front, which means less money they have to extract from the customer. We'll happily sell them the meter with a number of years of service. But most of those meter companies also don't provide the service. They don't provide the payment collection service. The companies provide that themselves. And in the energy access space, the renewable energy companies don't have that infrastructure. So they want to buy that.
Next question, Ron.
So there's a lot of people in the world, companies in the world that do prepaid meter services. And what is special about your back office software that makes you either cost competitive or more desirable or something? What is the critical thing that makes them want to buy your stuff rather than buy one of these established company services?
Well, the existing prepaid meters, they usually use a smart card service. They're much more expensive. So, for example, the Zambian utility is spending about $200 to $300 per meter to buy that kind of technology. It's designed to a Western level of standards and then being sold into a developing country. And so it's expensive. And we designed this using a whole bunch of frugal engineering principles to get the cost dramatically lower.
Question, Debjit.
So my question is really around the sales strategy. So you mentioned this was B2B, and one of the things I'm concerned about is finding the right middlemen in these countries to kind of take this forward. You're going to need that distribution network. So how do you plan to address that and to build that network?
The energy access space has relatively few companies into it. We're quite well known in that space. For example, I've chaired sessions at UN-organized conferences on energy access. So we're known they're coming to us. We've had something like 50-odd inquiries from companies in, I think, 20 countries now. They're coming to us. We're not having a problem finding partners who can sell this for us.
Question, Will.
So help me understand, because in your introduction or your write-up, you says, yeah, you need sort of the SMS to do it, but now you're saying you don't need phone access in the community where the meter's installed. So what's the way then of communicating and dealing with the payments?
It's both and. We use SMS to enable them to purchase the tokens, but the reality in most developing countries is there's SMS access somewhere. It might be on the west side of the valley, but not the east. It might be by the big fig tree at the corner. Right? They know where they can get mobile access. And in particular, the agents are usually set up at places where there's mobile access to sell mobile top-up. What we don't need is mobile access at every meter. And that's a key differentiator.
Okay, and back to feedback. So, Shaheen, what takeaway advice? Put yourself in his shoes and send him on his way.
So I personally would think about how the challenges, as was mentioned earlier, around becoming a vertically integrated kind of solution provider, because to my knowledge, none exists in this market. Now try to understand, why is it? Is it because of the technology? Is it because of the know-how? What was it that prevented a hardware company to become this kind of vertically integrated, hardware and service provider? Just kind of think about that and try to convince yourself that you have solved the problems that they were unable to overcome.
Ron, if you were in Mitra's shoes?
It's interesting in the way you present that makes me feel like you have the experience to go in there and make the kind of decisions that this company would need. However, just for a moment, suspend that, because I don't know you well yet, but you sound like you might have that background. But if you didn't have that, my recommendation to you would be to definitely partner with people who are putting in microgrids in Kenya, people that are putting in cell phone towers all over Africa, because they have the infrastructure that you might not be able to afford to support the service. But then again, I'm leaving a little bit of room here because I think you may know more about this than I do.
Feedback, Debjit.
Yeah, so I guess this goes back to my question, and partly to Ron's point. I think you need really strong partners to make this happen. People that, or rather partners that people trust in these local areas, and really partners that have done these infrastructure type plays in developing nations. I mean, this is a tough thing to do. I think execution will be hard. It sounds pretty easy on paper, but I think the devil's in the details when you execute. Who owns and operates the meters? How do you replenish them? What happens in case of vandalism, whatever else? These are all details that need to be worked out. But
Feedback from Mitra.
Yes, so I'm wondering whether the cheap meter is really sort of the limiting factor as you look at the overall investment of putting the microgrid in place, and wondering where you wouldn't need to do more to really capture that value around it. Because it sounds like you got a really neat system for customers to pay for electricity, but then if it's still expensive to run a wire between sort of where the electricity comes from, and then you have a cheap meter, then cheap might not be a feature that is required. So I'd really look at where you can integrate and capture more and become more of the integrator rather than say, here's a good meter and you sort of go figure it out, in the hope that they will buy your services and sort of keep the updates.
Excellent. Thank you, Willem, and thank you, Mitra. So next up, we have Leo Goldstein of Airborne Wind Energy Labs. So Leo, you got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Leo Goldstein. I'm the founder of Airborne Wind Energy Labs. I'm an experienced entrepreneur. One of my companies has returned 50 times the invested capital. So today I will introduce you to an invention which allows to decrease costs of wind energy 10 times. This picture shows the simple version of this invention. It shows a tethered wing which flies crosswind, harvesting wind energy. A belt is attached to it. The belt rotates a rotor of a generator on the ground, and the generator generates electricity. The system works on the same aerodynamic principles as a conventional wind turbine, but it doesn't use the most expensive parts of the wind turbine: the tower, the rotor, and the gearbox. So the system allows 10 times cheaper wind energy, and this estimate is confirmed by peer-reviewed publications. And this is not something futuristic. This system can be built from the existing components which are mass-produced today. And I have 8 patent applications for the system. Next slide, please. So given the huge size of energy markets and the given ability of the system to address most of them, I selected a business model of intellectual property licensing. The company will secure patents and license them to equipment manufacturers, and then reinvest some of the proceeds into the future research. The company will aim to the revenues to annual revenues above $1 billion with profit margins above 50%. The value proposition is simple. It is the cheapest utility scale electricity source, 3 to 10 times cheaper than existing alternative. The future customers are companies like Siemens, General Electric, Mitsubishi, and other power plant manufacturers. The aim to generate 20% of world electricity within 20 years. Companies like Siemens and Shell can help.
10 seconds.
But meanwhile, I collaborate with other researchers. And this is just an artist impression of one variation of the system.
And time. So let's move right into the questions. Shaheen, let's start with you. What questions would you like to ask?
Do you have an indication of what Siemens or GE or Mitsubishi need to see proven before they will engage in some kind of a licensing arrangement?
I expect they will not go into licensing arrangement directly with me, so the development will start with startups. And when the startups using this technology get traction, the big companies like Siemens would purchase them. This is the path that I envision, that I expect. I might get pleasant surprise if somebody starts early, but I don't expect this.
Next question, Ron.
I see this as strictly a rural application. Is that the way? I have 2 questions. First of all, is this strictly a rural application, or do you see this in high density?
I see it utility scale. So utility scale. It is supposed to provide energy to the grid. It is this device would replace large part of contemporary nuclear or fossil fuel power plants.
So
with
my
wind
second
energy.
question is, what's the capacity of a particular system like this?
It depends on the size. So it can be size of a single device can be as high as 100 megawatts, but it will be
One device can be 100 megawatts?
Yeah, it depends on the size of the wing.
Wow.
Next question, Debjit.
So on that size, 100 megawatt kite, I'd like to understand what the weight of that is. And secondly, what experimental data do you have? And not just short-term experimental data. What long-term experimental data do you have?
Can you repeat the beginning of the question?
The first question was, how much does a 100 megawatt kite generator weigh? How large a system are we talking?
Yeah, I cannot say how large. I cannot say this from the top of my head. There are computations. I can send them to you.
It's a few thousand tons
No,
at minimum.
No, you see, the only wings, the wings are flexible. The wings are just nylon kites, and the generator is on the ground. This is the idea. It is different from Makani power. It's a different path. And on the second question, I computed that it is 100 megawatt plant would cost around $10 million.
Actually, the second question was, do you have any experimental field data?
I don't, but there are other airborne wind energy companies which do have data for their own devices, for their own designs. And I have some data that they published.
You can ask a question.
So most kite power companies, they fly these 8 patterns as sort of the kite flies out and then you reel it in. So I think the difference I see is that you have a belt actually that reels it in. So you use more like the lift of the kite than having to sort of maneuver the kite and capture the wind. Is that correct?
Exactly. This is the idea, the use of fast motion power transfer.
And so how much power do you need then? So the belt, I guess, needs to reel in the kite. So what's your calculation and how much power is generated versus how much power is spent to reel in the kite so that you can do the trick again?
Reeling in the kite is energy to spend on reeling in the kite depends on the kite type. In let's say if you don't use ram kite, it can be less than 10% of the energy that is generated. But basically, it's reeled in by the action of the wind. The electrical motor only pulls it to keep its form and to prevent line falling.
So takeaway advice, coming right back here, Shaheen, what would you like to recommend?
So one issue that a lot of these kite power companies faced was around permitting. So I would be mindful of what kind of permitting restrictions would limit the size of your system. I highly doubt a 100 megawatt system would be feasible or legal. So I would look into those potential issues, figure out a window in which you make the most sense, and then kind of focus perhaps on that versus kind of, being kind of everything for everybody, in my opinion.
I would echo that. As I read this, I got caught in the dream that this would be a great rural opportunity, meaning that very small systems for very small farms, that this might be something that could be used out on the plains where the winds are very high. And the 100 megawatt kind of plant would be one that I would look at later. Maybe your business model doesn't work that way, but my suggestion is I think small first.
Feedback.
Yeah, so I mean, you can't cheat physics. You're converting ultimately kinetic energy to electrical energy. And it doesn't matter if you have the generator in the air or on the ground. You're going to need huge aerodynamic forces to get 100 megawatts or anywhere near it to the ground. So number one, it's going to be a very large system. Secondly, if you look at what the previous guys have done, folks like Makani, folks like Joby Energy, they have had an incredibly difficult time getting the controls to work. It's a very hard controls problem, especially when you have storms and things like that. You have to look at recovery. You have to think about FAA limits, all those things, those practical things. From the standpoint of what a major OEM like Siemens would want to see, They want to see long-term data in real conditions, not for a few hours, but for months on end, in very difficult conditions, realistic conditions. This thing has to be super rugged, and it has to produce energy as promised. Otherwise, it's just way too disruptive a technology to take that kind of risk.
And feedback, Willem.
So I think based on the sort of the drawing on your first slide, it shows like that you have a few simplifications to existing kite systems. I do think that the belt might limit the height that you can fly the kite, and that's one of the selling points, to sort of go to higher air where you can't get with a tower, because you get higher and more consistent wind speeds. I think you're licensing out IP without having a prototype is difficult unless you can find the right partnership. But what an investor wants to see, they want to see a flying kite. So build the smallest one that you can fly, because you'll learn, and I think that's what I've seen in some of the kite things that we've been involved in, that controlling the kite and flying the kite without manual intervention is extremely challenging. If you even think about it, if you were to go to the beach and you fly a kite, go up and down consistently, even for a human that's difficult, and now you want sort of computer to do that, and it's easy to draw it in a two-dimensional picture, but once it's three-dimensional under different conditions. But I think you might have a nice simplification. So if you find an entrepreneur that's willing to build a prototype and get that experience on board, I think there might be a market for it, but your current idea of finding or waiting for somebody to come and say, here are the patents, I think you'll get very little traction with that.
Thank you, Willem, and thank you, Leon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, the last pitch before the break is Callum Chisholm of SafeCell. Callum, you have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Thanks, Graham. So what we have at SafeCell is a new fuel cell technology that works at a very advantageous intermediate temperature range. Now, what a fuel cell is basically is just a box, fuel goes in, and electricity comes out. At the heart of that box is what's called the stack. And it's the stack that actually converts that fuel through the magic of electrochemistry into electricity. So what we have developed at SafeCell is a intermediate temperature stack that operates at about 250 degrees Celsius, or the highest setting of your home oven. And at that temperature range, we can use commercial fuels, any commercial fuel, very easily. And at that temperature range, we can still use conventional materials and components like you would find in your home oven or a hot water heater. And so the combination of using these commercial fuels and having a very rugged stack that's composed of standard metal and polymer components makes it quite applicable in portable power applications. And there are many different portable power applications, starting with military, as you might imagine, for man-portable power units, and then scaling up into, say, auxiliary power for long-haul trucks, so they don't have to idle while they're getting their trucks filled at the ports, and then going also to the oil and natural gas industry. There's lots of remote sensing and monitoring applications for natural gas pipelines and wellhead. And so you might say, well, this sounds an awful lot like a Honda generator, so why don't I just go pick one up from the local hardware store? But a very small combustion generator does not really fit the bill because it's very inefficient, so you'd be carrying a lot of fuel with you out there. And it's also effectively extremely dirty and noisy, for instance, if you're trying to hold it on your body while you're using it. And if you need to put it out into a portable power application where you need to run out in the field, drop it down, and come back in a month or two, basically its lifetime is very limited and it has high maintenance. A SafeCell generator, in contrast, can use the same fuels, so you can use the same fuels that are widely available, but we'd have about 4x the fuel efficiency, and fuel cells are effectively pretty clean and almost completely silent compared to a combustion generator. And at the heart of our device is basically a solid state material, so we have no moving parts. Our lifetime is much higher and have much lower maintenance. Next slide. And basically, we plan to be the exclusive provider of our stacks to system integrators who will wrap the power box around it and give it to the end customers in variable markets. And our value proposition, again, is this combination of existing fuels out there, high durability, and low cost. And I'll just say that we're founded on rock-solid IP out of Caltech. We have revenues already from stack sales and some contracts. And
10
we'll
seconds.
be pulling out the first full systems in 2014 to show that this technology works out there in the field. And we are currently raising $7 million to push towards commercialization in 2016. Thank you.
And time. So let's go right into questions. Go ahead, Willem.
So you said that the range is about 10 to 1,000 watts. So that's about I guess that's a 1 kilowatt. So what's limiting that scale? Would you be able to go bigger, or that becomes too expensive?
Yeah, if you go back to the first slide, that's a 1 kilowatt stack that we have there. Look, you can see it's very durable because it looks like if it hit you, you might die. But and the only thing limiting size is that things you have to overcome issues when you scale. That is using basically a kind of like small dinner plate surface area cell. That gets us into a range where you can kind of say that we're in the kilowatt range. If we wanted to go higher, there are some issues, but at the materials level, it looks like there's nothing that's a showstopper. It's more at the engineering level. You'd have to make sure your heat distribution is even through the stack and such.
So what's the cost per kilowatt then? If you
I'd be happy to have that discussion with you in private. It is half of the competitive technology, which is called the high temperature PEM, or phosphoric acid, right now, and we're making them still, kind of semi-automatic in the lab. So that, I think, is pretty impressive, and it's due to the fact that all of our components are, say, aluminum or simple stainless steel.
Next question, Debjit.
Yeah, so my question was about the cost also, but related to that, which target markets do you consider most attractive initially?
If you go to the slide down, that's in the order there. I mean, military is the most attractive because they'll actually give you money up front to develop them a product, and so we have a $1 million grant from the Army to make a 50-watt propane unit that would sit on a soldier for battery recharging. We're also working with a partner in Norway on a 1 kilowatt diesel APU, and this is all definitely coming out of military markets. But both those products, because they use commercial fuels, once the price point comes down by about half, can enter into commercial markets quite rapidly.
And do you have kind of a clear plan for getting that price down? Because that has been a traditional problem.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, it's almost on our side we can sit on a solar toilet because the gas coming off of that solar toilet is very, very dirty, and that's our claim to fame. We can run on dirty fuel, so that'll be a good press release if the stack can actually survive that. I'm not exactly sure, but it's not really a conventional fuel, so.
Very good. So Shaheen, would you like to jump right into feedback and advice?
So, yeah, I guess without knowing what the cost is, it's hard to give advice. But, I mean, obviously you've done a great job with technology development, and my advice would be to figure out how to manufacture these things.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you that...
There's no response here. It's just feedback. Go ahead, Ron.
Ditto.
I think that curve to get the cost down will be critical. It's easy to get, not easy. It's not as hard to get those first few sales, but for widespread commercial adoption, I see a tough road.
Feedback, Willem.
Yeah, I think eventually the bigger market is going to be if you hit residential. I think there's quite a bit of sort of activity in that space. I mean, I think Bloom has been very successful. They've been able to build big units, and I assume that's relatively comparable. So I'm not sure if you're sort of on the one hand say you got robust, cheap materials, then well, why can't you bring the cost down or get and if that's what you need is sort of an advanced manufacturing strategy, then I think that's where you need to focus to get that bigger market. So it's good that you can generate early revenue, but think about where the real size of the prize is. And I think integrating gas in a way, either as backup power, but I think you need to be a little bit bigger there and really see what's the hurdle to get it bigger and cheaper.
Fantastic. Thank you, Willem. And thank you, Callum. So we are going to hear from our platinum sponsor right now, which also happens to be Willem on this panel. So, Willem, you want to tell us about Game Changer?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Graham. Yeah, so thanks for coming out here all tonight for the Ultralight Startup event by Ultralight Startups. So what we do in Shell Game Changer is we run an early stage seed incubation program where we work with startup companies, entrepreneurs, but also national labs and academic researchers to bring their ideas to a proof of concept. So we can be either the first or second investor or work parallel to other investors. And then really our model is more of a collaborative research model rather than a direct equity investment. And it's really to prove the technology then within the business space of Shell and bring it to a point where then either our venture arm or our R&D core R&D program or the business can then be sort of the next customer, and then we like to graduate our projects in the business space for Shell, and in that way get that technology on the radar screen of Shell. And then where we try to play is more in the disruptive innovation space, unusual ideas sort of off the beaten path, and it need a little bit of incubation before sort of the expert communities are going to take a closer look at these technologies, and we really try to create that experimental data and proof of concept in the relevant industry. So if you've got any questions about, just come up to me in the break or after the event, or send me an email. So we also run a website where everyone can submit an idea. It's shell.com/gamechanger. So everyone can submit an idea that says that we will evaluate it. We're not necessarily saying you'll get an answer within 24 hours, but we'll try to get back to everyone with sort of some feedback and saying whether it's a fit or not, or it's worth having a follow-up conversation on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Willem. So do we have Ryan Howder from Hobson Town? Awesome. Hobson Town is our gold sponsor out here in Silicon Valley. You can use that microphone right there. Yeah, use that one.
Thanks, Graham. I'm Ryan Howder with Hobson Town. We are a retained executive search firm and advisory services. We focus primarily in early to mid-stage companies that are focused in and around, I would say, energy, technology, and resource scarcity markets. We are entering our 17th year. We have 35 people across 5 offices. We just opened our last office in Toronto. So this is our first partnership with Ultralight. We're excited to be here. I'll be in the back floating around during the break as well, if anybody has any questions, and can fill you in a bit more on Hobson Town, but it's great being here. Thanks for having us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ryan. So we have a 5-minute break. The bar will be open, and then we're going to come back and hear the remaining 4 pitches and the contest. So see you back in 5 minutes. Okay, our first pitch after the break is going to be Ernest Desmarais of Sun2 Fiber. So Ernest, you have 3 minutes.
Thanks,
Go
Graham.
ahead.
Thanks, Graham. My talk just got better since it's after the break. I was told 1 beer, I can speak better. 1 beer, you'll hear better, so I'm glad to be after the break. I'd like to introduce our license model for Sun-to-Fiber coupler that we're developing with the help of partners and the DOE. You can see that today, the generation of electricity for grid is by solar thermal, the optimum generation. And our Sun-to-Fiber coupler is enabled by 2 things. First is the U.S. Navy has recently helped us to make available optical fiber that's durable to sunlight and can carry very high levels of energy, up to 100 kilowatts. And so the second thing is a portfolio of patents that I've been working on for the last 15 years, about 50 patents that enable thin films, sputter-thin films, that now have very high index and very high transparency. They can also carry very high levels of solar energy without heating. They go from below the level of glass, the index of glass, to above the level of diamond all the way up to the level of semiconductor, and they're still transparent. And so these films are used to make this Sun-to-Fiber coupler, which takes the light from a high-powered tracking mirror and couples it into a fiber efficiently. Our goal is 90% efficient. And so that light then can be carried by the fibers to thermal storage. With the help of NREL and the SAM model, we've been able to show that we can generate electricity at about half the capital cost of the best known case, which is the solar thermal tower with storage. And so this reduces the cost of grid-connected electricity below 6 cents, the sunshot goal. And we believe we can do this also by retrofitting existing power plants. 2 of the advantages of this are that we use about half of the area, and we use about 1/3 of the mirrors. So next foil. So we've received a $1.6 million ARPA grant that we're working with, and we've closed a private round with private investors recently. And we're working to consolidate the new IP for these films and this device, the Sun-to-Fiber coupler. And you can see the result on the sunshot goals on the bottom right is to pick up this last 6 cents that no one knows how we're going to get for the generation of grid-connected electricity. Yes?
Okay, Debjit, let's start with you. First question.
Wow, really mixing things up here. Okay. So my question is, it sounds like you're replacing effectively a pumped thermal fluid loop.
That's right. We eliminate the line of sight. We eliminate the heliostats in the line of sight transport. We eliminate the solar tower, the receiver, and all the pumped fluid. The fiber goes directly to salt.
Right. So is there a limitation on the distance that you can travel? And you mentioned the cost. Do you have a sense for the kind of the sub cost of just this?
Yeah, that's the savings is by eliminating those very expensive components. And we're about a third of the distance to storage that the heliostats have. And we use about a third, 28% of the reflective area. We also use parabolic mirrors, which are more efficient than the flat heliostats, which track the meridian, of course, not the sun. And so our goal is to be able to build this coupler for between $1,500 and $2,000 each. It'll take between 70 by 70 to 100 by 100 of these mirrors, about a third of the area of the best case for today's optimal designs that are predicted for 2020.
Let's take another question. Go ahead, Ron.
Can you just say a little bit more about your ARPA-E contract? What are you developing there? I mean, all of that.
We're developing a sun-to-fiber coupler for solar thermal and for daylighting applications.
Will you own that IP when you're done?
We own 50 patents that it's based on. The new IP, of course, is Beidou, and we'll have rights to license it, but of course, DOE has back-in.
And what is the critical market failure as to why they've funded you? I'm not quite clear.
Well, it's a disruptive technology. It's very risky. We're lowering the risk to the point that investors can take an interest in it. And if we're successful with the milestones that are written in the program, the 90% efficient transfer of sunlight from the mirrors to the fiber, then this will be the franchise for grid-connected electricity worldwide.
One last quick question. What is the risk then? I know ARPA-E funds things that are highly risky. So what is it that everybody needs to know that tells you what might not happen?
Yeah, good. Two questions. During the period of the proposals and the referees, there was great concern that these films would absorb the light and heat up. And we've been able to show that that's not the case. They are enormously transparent. That's transformative. The second thing that's a concern, of course, are the 5 steps that I showed on the first foil. We've actually made great progress on the first 3. The 4th step, we think we've already shown in previous products. It's really the 5th step. And there are folks in China that have done the calculation showing that this can be done adiabatically or without loss. And so it's really this last step to the fiber that's the key.
Okay, so you got a few extra questions, so we're going to move right into feedback for this point. So Willem, if you can move right into feedback as well.
Yeah, so I missed my question, but anyway, I'll try to wrap it in. So to me, the way you present it, it's not entirely clear what you've built to date. So I think you got a lot of sort of moving parts to it. And so I think, anyway, so I think it would be useful to say, okay, this is really what I have and how it works. And, why it's cheaper, because you can see the concentrator to work. And then, I'm not sure whether the licensing model is like, I think if you get a commercialization partner in earlier, I think it will help you drive and be more effective, especially in the ARPA-E grant, because I know these things, you got sort of pretty tight milestones, and then somebody else needs to buy into those milestones. So I think if you like to keep sort of inventing rather than building a business, I think getting that partner in real early and think about, okay, because, there's enough people out there, I think, they're interested, because I think I've always wondered, I've seen a few of these proposals, because I assume that's one of the things you alluded to. It's like, how can you bring in daylight with these fibers and really capture the light? So I think even at that sort of residential office application, I think it's really cool and can have potential impact. And so you might even find different partners that you can work with, but bring them in early rather than, throw the IP over the fence.
And we'll come right here. So Shaheen,
So I have a bundled question and feedback. So I would ask myself, at what scale, what kind of investment needs to be made to get to the scale to show 10-cent levelized cost of energy per kilowatt hour? And if that number is more than $100 million for the whole system, then I'd stick to daylighting.
Great feedback. And Debjit?
So I think this is all going to, again, come down to proving it out in the field and getting real test data at reasonable scale. I think you mentioned, was it up to 100 kilowatts per fiber? So at a utility scale, you'd need to bundle a number of these together. But I think showing that over again, a long period of time under variable weather conditions, dust, all sorts of things is going to be critical.
And feedback, Ron.
My comments are exactly the same as Willem's. I got confused about where the special sauce was and how this whole thing was coming together. And as you could hear from my questions, I wasn't quite clear where you were bringing some new technology. So next time you do this, I think a little more clarity.
Excellent. Thanks, Ron. Thank you. Thanks, Ernest. Okay, next up we have Peruz Kavapur of WERS Energy. So Peruz, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, so thank you. 40% of solar plants usually the cost of the thermal storage system, because that's very critical part of when you generate energy from solar system, you have to store it to have a continuous production. What you need for a thermal storage is a material that can keep a thermal energy inside of it. So the size is not that big, relatively speaking. As well as you need a less corrosive system, and it has to be cheap enough, again, relatively, and it shouldn't deteriorate in high temperatures. The current technology is use of molten salt, which is very common. Unfortunately, the price goes up because of the price of nitrate goes up, and it's fairly corrosive. And also, even though the tank is relatively cheap, there are lots of pumps and tubes because they're two-tank system that liquid has to circulate through them. Our concept is, instead of using a very expensive material with cheap tank, we chose to go for a very cheap material with expensive tank and see if we can put these ideas together and get an overall cheaper price. And we were successful in doing so. So that's basically the concept we went after. So what we did, basically, we find a material that's much cheaper. So compared to state-of-the-art, which is $40 to $60 per kilowatt hours in molten salt and its complex two-tank system, we went with a super TES, which is supercritical fluid, which actually have a high capacity because of a supercritical fluid properties. And it requires more expensive tank. However, the total price of both would be much less. So next page. So if you look at the plot here, you can see the price of tank is more expensive. However, the price of fluid is drastically less. And this project was funded by ARPA-E. And we already have a partner. There's a team of UCLA, JPL, and Southern California Gas. We were able to find materials that's suitable for this. They don't deteriorate. And we did a long-term testing on them with the proper time scales. We show it's 40% less cost for this billion-dollar type of investments. And we are showing demos in lab scale demo, and also we are doing now field demo with our partner, Southern California Gas, and we show this is feasible. Basically, 2.8 gigawatt of solar field right now exists in the world, and 2.4 gigawatt is getting made. And basically, the capital price is going to come down almost 30% of total cost right now. So I guess done.
Perfect. Going right to questions, Willem, you start.
So what is the temperature range that you're aiming for? And also, you mentioned that you might be able to do something with waste heat. So again,
Yes.
what type of temperature do you capture there?
So this is actually interesting because ARPA keep jacking up the requirement of a temperature. So we started at 400 degrees, then in the next cycle, they're like, oh, by the way, it's 550. And then we went up to 650. However, the material, we're sort of a bit ahead of the game because we actually have a interesting plot I usually give during our presentation. It's almost like a prediction of the requirement by ARPA temperature. And we actually cover all of those. So we can go up to 800 to 1,000 right now. But the requirement right now is 650.
And so on the other side, sort of the heat to electricity part, do you
Yes.
got any sort of special ideas there? Or are you just waiting what the market is going to
That's basically
deliver?
what market dictates. But the main thing for the energy production is the temperature because of thermodynamics that you and exergy. So you're good with that because we're high temperature.
Shaheen goes next because he didn't get a question before, so go ahead, Shaheen.
So if you look at the overall cost of a solar thermal plant, going from, well, first of all, I would assume this is going into new installations that not exist, not retrofits, correct?
Sure, yeah.
So for a new installation, for a given size, how much savings are there
This is basically 40%. So if I want to give you dollar value, it's something of the order of $200 million.
Of $1 billion
plants, yes. Which make it more interesting to developing country, which money is more even restrictive. The price come from billion to $600 million. So that become much more attractive.
Question, Debjit?
Yeah, so my question is, from the actual thermal fluid standpoint, it sounds interesting and certainly inexpensive, but you're increasing a lot of complexity on the infrastructure side as far as the tank goes.
Well, tank is actually, I'm sorry I'm interrupting you,
Okay.
but tank is actually fairly straightforward. It just needs lots of retrofitting because the pressure is much higher.
Right. So much higher pressure. Are there any similar limitations with the heat exchange mechanism?
No, just because you have a higher temperature, you just need to be safe with the heat and pressure. But we did a calculation on the cost, and the cost is still much less than what you have with molten salt.
And is it easy to circulate the fluid around the heat exchanger and get good exchange?
Because the heat transfer fluid that goes through it, it doesn't get exposed to the pressure. The pressure problem is on the storage fluid that you don't need to flow it inside. It's just a storage fluid that stays there.
In question, Ron.
So what the application is for utility scale?
Well, this is a big solar field. So you can start with a big solar field, but there's no other reason not to scale it down. Even transportable, if you can think about it, you can transfer if you find a way to transport these type of things. However, also you can think about it as a battery, and you can use it in grid system, even smaller, large grid. When you're high power in the grid, you can store it in these thermal systems because now it's much cheaper than molten salt. And then when time of need, you can just push it back to the grid and use the power.
Can it be scaled down to building size?
I don't think it could be. I mean, conceptually it does. It's just,
I meant from a cost point of view. I didn't mean from technical. I mean, do you still get these same savings at a much smaller size?
I doubt it.
You jump right into feedback. Go ahead, Ron.
I haven't been following the solar thermal utility scale stuff very well, and so don't know the needs for this. On the other hand, the technology looks pretty promising, provided that the infrastructure of the vessels and so forth, you've got that all under control. But one place where there's really an opportunity, but it doesn't sound like there's a chance that you can use your technology, is on building scale. Storage at building scale is really important in terms of the overall energy needs of the country. So if there's any way you can scale it down, it'd be worth looking at.
And feedback, Shaheen.
So I have two pieces of feedback. One is to cast your benefit in terms of IRR on a typical plant, because that is sort of the indicator that's used by project financiers when it comes to choosing the profile of their projects that are offered by engineering firms. So that's one. And then second would be asking SoCal Edison, if they're sponsoring this, to put you in front of their EPCs. I would assume that SoCal Edison uses these EPCs to build their whatever type, combined cycle plants or whatever they're using right now, and say, hey, put us in front of them. We'd like to show them our technology and see what it's going to take until they would license from us. So we'd raise equity or apply our precious grant dollars towards meeting those goals, or maybe even engaging in some kind of a relationship with them early on, where they pay you up front in an RE towards some kind of a favorable licensing arrangement down the road upon success.
Feedback, Debjit.
So one piece of feedback is I like the presentation. I think it was pretty clear. The one thing that I would change maybe is really address the key technical issue, which is really around the new pressure vessels and the infrastructure required for that. I'm actually interested, I think, in really the big scale applications. I think this potentially, assuming, we haven't really talked about it, but assuming the economic scale with size, I think this could be used in a lot of different applications, not just solar thermal.
And feedback, well.
Yeah, so I would think, how many of these solar thermal plants are really going to be built if that's your primary focus? So I think that would be a big concern. But I do think that sort of people starting to discover, oh, we can do something with heat. If you can move it around, if you can store it. So find the right application. And I always like sort of the waste heat angle, because sort of underexplored, I think. So there's a lot of space. But also think a little bit on how far you need to go with the integration, because you got some requirements on pressure. So is it really compatible with sort of the heat to electricity part, and see where can you find a technology where you're better than anyone else in the heat to electricity, because then you have a full system solution that might be very attractive because you got such a lower cost on your fluid.
Thank you.
Thank you, Willem, and thank you, Peruz. Okay, next up we have Omer Shalev of Thermostatly. Omer, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi. What makes smart devices, and in particular smart thermostats, smart? Information. Thermostatly is a new software application. Can you go to the previous slide? Thermostatly is a software application that enables smart thermostats to respond to social alerts. Our prototype allows select tweets and hashtags to temporarily change the thermostat settings in your home. You may be wondering, what is the point of integrating Twitter with my thermostat? I mean, there are already sophisticated thermostats out there, and there are demand response thermostats coming into the market. Thermostatly differentiates itself in the following ways. It diversifies the sources of outside information. So it's no longer just your utility, but a whole cast of outside organizations that can provide important pieces of information. And with more information, we can make smart thermostats smarter. It also provides new ways to manage your usage in response to critical events. So you can have your local utility, like PG&E, which is already on Twitter, sending out a specific tweet in a demand response event. But now we can have environmental organizations tweeting about climate change, or your local air pollution control district telling you when outside air pollution levels are unhealthful. Or another organization might be able to tell you what percentage of your electricity is renewable at a certain point in time. And all of these things are considerations we can distill into simple pieces of information for your thermostat. Thermostatly also allows thermostat owners to promote the campaigns that they've supported. So you've executed and participated in a campaign, you can broadcast to all of your followers all of the greenhouse gas and money that you've saved. Next slide, please. On the revenue side, we see Thermostatly driving the adoption of smart thermostats. There are also demand-side management of electricity in a couple of programs. We can make custom organization-sponsored campaigns to promote environmental awareness, and also government initiatives for energy efficiency and conservation. On the economic advantages, we're utilizing an existing information network. We're not creating a new opaque one. So organizations are on Twitter, and we want them to stay on Twitter. We can also increase participation in certain campaigns through social networking and following. We can improve device intelligence by including those outside pieces of information. And now organizations like utilities can thank individual participants on Twitter for participating in demand response events. From the customer's perspective, we offer this for free to smart thermostat owners. And companies, organizations, and utilities sending out those tweets can determine the participant engagement they're having on a very individual level. They can also measure the influence their campaigns are having at a very granular scale. I'll just close by saying I know this is a very competitive market, but I think we have a really strong team comprised of engineers and software developers who've brought products to market. We've been asked to present at an Energy Innovation Expo tomorrow, and we've won a couple of awards at a clean tech competition. Thank you.
Nice job. So let's go right into the questions. Go ahead, Willem.
So what's the, do you got any idea how many people actually nowadays have smart thermostats?
Yeah, so that's actually growing. Right now, there are about 40,000 Nest smart thermostats being sold a month, and it's growing quite quickly. And then we know that smart thermostat manufacturers like Honeywell is getting into it. We also know that there are some more.
So what would block Nest for doing what you're doing?
So Nest has other programs, but we right now have our application running on top of Nest. And so I think that, well, basically we have a specific way of doing this through Twitter that is not being done right now.
But can they do it?
They haven't done it yet.
Okay. Next question, Debjit.
So I think you partly answered my question, which was it wasn't clear to me through this presentation what platform this app sits on and how, as a customer, I'm supposed to get it. So can you describe that?
Okay, so basically we've created an application that interfaces between Twitter and the API for Nest. And so we would find customers basically through either starting with environmental organizations that perhaps wanted to do campaigns sort of similar to something like Earth Hour, where everybody can show that they're lowering their thermostat for a particular cause, and then grow from there.
But I mean, I can. This is going to be sitting on my iPhone, and I can go to the the Apple Store and get it, or
you can basically go to our website and log in with your Twitter account, and then use your Nest credential, and run it from there. And yes, it would be. It's a software mobile application.
How do you get paid?
So we're thinking about several different ways that we could monetize this. And some of them would be either driving thermostat driving the sales of smart thermostats or demand-side management of electricity.
Question, Shaheen?
So I, hypothetically, I don't have a Nest, but let's say I did have a Nest thermostat. How would I find out about Thermostatly? How are you going to get to customers, to users?
Yeah, so as I said before, I think what we would have to do is basically reach out through different environmental campaigns at first. And we've started talking to some people at Nest and other manufacturers that sounded promising about using this platform. And I think we just have to grow from there, basically attracting new users through some of these movements that are popular.
Shaheen, do you want to move right into feedback?
Yeah, I would be very careful with your model, because if you're looking to derive some kind of value from having a population, you don't have a solid strategy for getting to that population, then with a model or a technology that's not defensible, I would think hard about the three and try to figure out how you would either have a defensible platform, proprietary platform, or some kind of a robust means of getting to that broad population, either through bundling yourself with Nest or some other thermostat, smart thermostat, I guess, offering, but somehow kind of figuring out how you're going to grow your business. That's just my 2 cents.
Feedback, Ron?
I would, in your next presentation, be much more informed about what's happening in the DR space, because you didn't mention any of the regulatory initiatives that are underway, and I think there are a whole bunch of those regulatory initiatives that are going to drown out your idea. The key thing for the future that's going to come to pass within the next 2 to 3 years is time-differentiated pricing. California's already got its legislative approval to put it in place for all residences for 2016. Twitter may or may not be the channel, but that's not what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is the information, and you need to talk about how that kind of information is going to promote your business model, because that kind of information is going to be available on a lot of other channels in a lot of other ways. The last thing I'd like to say is that I think I'd check your Nest numbers about 40,000 a month. There have been numbers that say they shipped 40,000 a month. There are no numbers that I've seen that said people are buying 40,000 a month. So you better check those numbers.
Feedback, Debjit.
Yeah, so this is an interesting era in terms of being a home energy consumer. These consumers are getting overwhelmed by DR programs, things like Nest, frankly, competing products from the utility itself, who feel like they're getting disintermediated. So that may be an approach for you, actually, is to think about how threatened the utilities feel by companies like Nest, because trust me, it's real, that threat. But I think fundamentally, I think I kind of question your basic value proposition. I'm not sure how many home energy consumption or home energy energy reduction events are going to be driven by things on Twitter. Fundamentally, it's not really clear to me. So really, because that's at the core of your value proposition, I would try to quantify that better.
And feedback.
Yeah, so I think to me the whole smart thermostat is sort of fascinating, because all of a sudden you make something that's probably the most boring thing in your house to something that's potentially very cool. But I wonder, if you look at the price point of a Nest, I think that's pretty steep to be cool on something like a thermostat. But you make it even cooler by sort of having a tweeting channel to it. But then how you monetize that, I'm wondering whether you can link it to some real information, like, can you put the weather on, for example, and say, okay, you can anticipate, okay, there's going to be sunny, so where your usage is going to go. So can you link it to really usable information? Because my concern would be if people get into it in this whole saving mode because they just got started, it will die off. See, I remember when I got I got a smart meter at home, and they'll send you this little box that says, okay, this is how you use it. You look at the first 2 weeks and then you're done. Sort of how do you keep the customer coming back and enjoying that interaction and having some real useful information out of it? Because I think you've established a connection, and now it's ready to really figure out what you're going to do with it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Willem, and thanks, Homer. So the last pitch of the night is going to be Simon Saba of Rotary Wing Engine. Simon, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. We've developed a new internal combustion engine that offers a 20 to 30% reduction improvement in the efficiency and pollution, yet can cost 80% less than existing engines. This is a highly scalable engine. It can go from a small generator to a motorcycle to a car, and multiple engines can be stacked to address a larger applications. What's unique about this engine is that our forces start out rotational as opposed to all the other engines in the world that start out with an up and down movement and convert that to rotational. We essentially eliminate that conversion process. Another unique feature is that we have 8 power strokes in the time that a traditional engine would have only 1 power stroke. And what that enables is a drastic shrinking of the size and weight of the engine. If you look in the back over there, there's a 1.6 liter engine that weighs 49 pounds complete. And this particular engine, with only 2 changes, 2 parts changing, we can change the compression ratio, and therefore we can have a diesel or a natural gas or gasoline version of it. The customer is huge. The customer base is huge. There's a market of $500 billion out there, dominated primarily by the value of the engine in an automobile. And the way we make money is by licensing our technology to those OEMs that are already making engines. And the time to revenue depends on the complexity of the application itself. It can range from 1 to 2 years for generator or jet skis, and up to 2 to 4 for motorcycles, and 3 to 6 years, closer to 6 for the automotive market. And the value proposition is that we enable these customers to meet the regulatory and the emissions regulations and have an 80% reduction. So how do you get 80% reduction? Well, we have a drastic reduction, 90% reduction in the number of parts that go into it. Those parts are smaller and easier to machine. They can be extruded as opposed to cast, which is a much cheaper process. And it's a very capital efficient model. Now, last November, we competed with 181 companies to win the Cleantech Open, and we're the only ones, one of the few that actually burn fossil fuels in that competition. We have a bunch of patents filed because it's a very novel design. We have a blue ribbon advisory board from Caltech, Berkeley, as well as GM executives and SEMA executives. If you know the automotive industry, SEMA is a big, very large organization. The vice president of technology is on a board.
10 seconds.
And I'm done.
Great. So let's move right into questions. You're up. Shaheen, go ahead.
So what scale have you actually demonstrated this engine at? What displacement?
So right now we're concentrating on 1.6, and the reason we picked it, it's an extremely common size globally. It covers a compact here, but the mid-size auto market globally, and it also happens to be the very large motorcycle, which is guys that are, we got a lot of pull from the motorcycle.
So that engine is running?
It is running right now. We have a prototype that's running. We're improving it. And we're getting, we've done our own simulations, and we're also leveraging Livermore talent to do some simulation for us, to validate at a third party.
Next question, Ron.
I don't know how this is the same or differs from the rotary engines that Mazda used a number of years ago, but their big problems ended up, I mean, they had all the advantages you're talking about. Their problems were seals.
Mm-hmm. We have, there's actually 3 problems. The seals was the second most important. We didn't solve them, we eliminated them altogether. There's, in addition to the seals, ours are much more similar to a traditional piston engine. We also concentric as opposed to eccentric. That's another problem that they had. But the biggest problem that they had, which impacted the efficiency and the pollution levels, is that the configuration of the combustion chamber was such that part of the combustion, because it's the fact that it's shaped like a crescent, is actually trying to spin it the opposite direction. So you're burning fuel just to counteract the effect of that negative force, so it ends up being a very inefficient engine. The Mazda is an example. The RX-8, which was shipping until last year, was getting an 18 mile per gallon fuel efficiency when it's the size of a Miata. It should have been more like 28 to 30.
Question, Debjit.
Yeah, so just given your power density, my big question would be around emissions, and I think you mentioned that here, so I'd like to hear a little bit about that. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, so that's one. The other thing is that we are in an era, too, where standard, conventional internal combustion engines, especially on the diesel side, are getting incredibly efficient. So your 20 to 30% number, what are you using as the benchmark?
So the reason there is a range actually is because on the gasoline engine, our improvement is closer to 30% because we start out at a much lower efficiency engine. It starts out at about 27%, so we're getting up around the 36%. On the diesel engine, it's naturally more efficient at 39. Therefore, our gain is only about 20%.
And the question on emissions,
Yeah.
how are you tackling it?
So we have a very unique engine, and I don't want to do a technical deep dive, but we have more knobs than a traditional engine. For example, we can completely evacuate the chamber, so completely exhaust 100% of the exhaust, which is simply not possible with a piston engine. And we can also vary the rate of change of the chamber volume, and that's also completely not possible with a traditional piston engine because it's determined by the geometry. We have more knobs than they actually have, and we have complete control over the compression ratio at any granularity that you want. Literally, by changing those two parts on the engine, we have that flexibility.
Question, Willem.
So I'm wondering what's holding you back, because you mentioned sort of your target customers, the big OEMs. So what did they tell you when they saw that thing?
So right now we have good engagement with one of the largest supplier into the auto industry, the second largest in the world. It's not Bosch. It's the next one. And I just came back from Japan recently, after meeting with their CTO and several of the engineering group managers. And in fact, I'm meeting with their U.S. representatives this coming Friday for follow-up, more on the business side rather than the technical
But so what's
side.
their feedback?
Very positive. We've had this reviewed. I can tell you, my advisory board, there's the former head of advanced R&D for General Motors was on it, told me, Simon, you cannot beat the tier one. Simon, you can't beat the tier one. Once we signed the NDA, I showed him the thing. He said, if you run into technical issues, this is the holy grail of engines. His words, not mine. It's been reviewed by people, very engine experts from both Livermore, from Berkeley. The other gentleman on my board is Professor Dibble, who is probably one of the most well-published engine guys in the world. There is no holdup other than us finishing up the development and getting to the next phase. So far, we've managed a lot in a period of 1 year. Typically, this is 3 to 4 years to get to our level, and $30–40 million, and we've spent a fraction of that.
So last round of feedback for the last pitch of the night. So go ahead, take away advice.
So my advice would be to get the OEMs and the tier ones to pay for all the development that's associated with passenger cars, but do not put any of your precious equity dollars into that passenger car application, because you'll end up diluting yourself significantly, because that's going to require a ton of money. And maybe if you want to keep some of it proprietary, I would think about using that for APUs. So trying to enter the APU market, auxiliary power market, with a flavor of this, where the barriers are lower and less development money is required. But you heard about the news from Ashadi's today. They just raised another $35 million after having raised, I think, 50 prior. I'm not sure, but I mean, it's going to need a ton of money to get to heavy duty or automotive applications.
I'm pretty impressed by what you're talking about, and have been. When I was in graduate school back in the 60s, we were playing with engines like this, and we didn't have the controls to do the kinds of things you're doing here, or the concepts. So they're very impressive. I would not look at the automobile market as well. I would look at some specialty markets where the variability that you have control over are an advantage, and there may be some very interesting other markets to look at. So that's where I'd get started. Big companies might crush you. You know, that's another problem, even though you have good people on your board.
Feedback, Debjit.
There have been some great recent internal combustion startups that have had licensing models. Shaheen mentioned Katie's. There's also Ecomotors and companies like that. Follow learn from them. Don't follow in their footsteps necessarily. See what they've done wrong, because as Shaheen noted, these are hugely capital intensive, and the tier one OEMs are very savvy. I mean, they're not going to give you great terms necessarily. So I would echo what we've heard here and say go after potentially some other markets. Keep those in mind. One could be light transportation for things like mopeds and scooters and things like that, which is a big market, especially in developing nations. And the other is stationary power, and that's a big growing market as well.
Last piece of feedback?
Yeah, so first of all, I think if you, I'm not sure whether you're willing to show it, but actually it's an amazing piece of engineering if you look at it, and then thinking about if you see it, then thinking about, okay, this thing really works, because it looks like, like a demo model that can't fire. So I think that's really good. I think in the pitch, I think you sort of have too many attributes that you sort of need to bring together. So I think the OEMs is sort of a longer term strategy, and see where they nibble or bite, and then, you sort of can give that away, because that's, I think about the Mazda story that, Wankel was sort of, I think in the 60s, that the first car, and then sort of never got traction. And also, I think on the fuel side, I think it's good to say, okay, I can take any fuel, but what's the best fuel, and focus on that. And of course, I think natural gas is a logical target, and I've seen sort of a lot of activity around stationary generators around gas. And this looks like a truly scalable, because you can put multiple engines here, and if you're more efficient and you can build an efficient gas generator, I think that's a really good first target, and I think that's a growing market. Or even in a sort of a lawnmower on gas, why not? If you have an efficient engine that does it better than existing engines. So think about what fuel is best. And the other attribute you have is sort of your low cost, and where does that really help you, that low cost, or that you can remotely produce it. So think about that, whether there's another model in remote manufacturing or something like that in areas that just don't have that capability.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Willem. And thank you, Simon. All right. Now is your chance to vote for your favorite startups and your favorite panelists. I was just mentioning at the break, I don't know who I would vote for. I think this is a really, really strong panel. Everybody's had awesome things to say. I would have a difficult time at it, but you're all going to have to figure that out on your own. You all should have an email that came from me, or at least everybody that registered in advance would have gotten an email from me at 8 p.m. today with a link that if you click on it, it's going to bring you to a form and ask you to vote. If you didn't get that email, you can type in this URL, uls.bz/sv-oct, which is like ultralightstartups.business/Silicon Valley-October, or something like that. Everybody got this? Okay, I'm going to make some announcements here. The next Future Energy event is all the way across the country in New York City on November 20th, next month. We are currently accepting applications from startups for that event. So if you know anybody that is based on the East Coast and would like to present at an event like this, be sure and send them to our site, and they can fill out the application form. In addition to the in-person event in New York City on November 20th, we will be doing a virtual ultralight startup future energy pitch event. So we've already prototyped this. These in-person events work well for kind of connecting people within a region. On the West Coast or on the East Coast, we're missing out the rest of the country and the rest of the world. So we've developed this platform to address that, and it's the same type of format, a bunch of startups, a bunch of investors, Q&A, feedback, audience voting, and we've prototyped it earlier this year. We had 9 companies from the US, Canada, Uruguay, South Africa, and Belgium, and we had investors from the US as well as the UK, Ireland, Germany, and Israel participating in that event, and it was fantastic. So the next one of those virtual events is going to be in December. Also, we will be at the ARPA-E Summit again for the second time next year on February 24th. So for those of you who go to the ARPA-E Summit in Washington, D.C., the first night of that is going to be a future energy pitch event. Anybody still voting? That's going to be the last vote that's going to tip it.
How come Shaheen got the email?
Aha. Shaheen bought a ticket. He registered in advance. So now I will bring up the results with a simple click of this button. This is the top startup by your vote. And it is Simon Saba of Rotary Wing Engine, first place. Congratulations. Second place, Peruz Kavapur of Wurs Energy, looks like, 26. And then third place is Callum Chisholm from Safe Cell. So come on up, guys. So now for the really big award. I would not have been able to vote in this contest. I don't know what I would have done. So thank you to Willem And thank you to Ron, and thank you to Shaheen and to Debjit for your fantastic advice on this panel. So who was it that is the audience choice and the winner of Eternal Gratitude? It looks like it's Debjit. Congratulations. Well done. Okay, so the bar is going to be open until 10 p.m., so that leaves us an hour and 15 minutes. So I encourage you to have a drink, and we'll see you over there.